Welcome back. In this segment, we're going to talk about abatement. That's a fancy word for remediation. In the asbestos business, there's not a mix-up between remediation and cleaning. It's not the case in the meth world. Abatement basically means that you're going to get somebody, whether it's the homeowner or the asbestos licensed certified contractor, somebody is going to get in there and remove it all. So if that process happens and you're watching, you want to just make sure that you know or have reason to believe that the person doing the job actually knows what he or she is doing. So we're going to give you that background. Obviously, you as the realtor and I as the home inspector, our primary goals is to make sure that our client is covered, is protected. And if the asbestos remediation is done poorly by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, now all of a sudden we've got our family moving into this home that has asbestos all over the floor, all over into the air, and they're going to be breathing that air for the next, 5 or 10 years. A whole bunch of, tens of thousands, perhaps millions of fibers into their lungs because you and I perhaps didn't protect them as well as we could have. So that's what this particular segment is about. You're going to be wanting to watch and make sure that whoever did the abatement had the right PPE. I know that stands for personal protective equipment, and that's going to be a full body suit, gloves, breathing face mask, and not just the kind that you get from Home Depot, but actually one that has cartridges that you screw in that are specifically meant for particulates. There's other kinds of cartridges that are meant for different kinds of chemicals, but where asbestos is a fiber, it's a particulate, it's a particle, and that's what you're going to want to be protecting yourself from or that's what the remediator is going to want to be protecting himself from. So you start there with that. Then you're going to have a concept called negative air. And what that basically means is, let's say that the room that you are in has the asbestos in it. We're going to be scraping that popcorn ceiling texture off, and as we're doing that, we're disturbing it. There is a risk that some of the disturbed asbestos fibers are going to want to dissipate. They're going to want to go into the room next door. They're going to want to be sucked into the furnace and be blown throughout the house. So as a result, we have what's called negative air. Of course, part of what that means is that if there is a duct system inside that room, it's sealed, it's blocked off. That's part of what is done at the very beginning. Another thing is that you create negative air so that basically if there is any air movement into or out of that room, you force air to not flow out, but to flow in. You do that by hooking up a HEPA vacuum. HEPA meaning high efficiency particulate air. You're going to have that HEPA vacuum outside the room, and it is going to be pulling air from the inside of the room. The air inside of the room gets sucked out of the room where it goes through this HEPA filter, and then it is exhausted out to where safe air can go, ideally to the exterior of the house. So when that happens, if there is any airflow, because the air is being sucked out of the room by the vacuum, that means that the natural air inside the house is trying to replace. It's moving in from the door to the room into the room itself. So this way we contain any asbestos fibers that are in the room, and we don't allow them to just naturally migrate to the exterior. That's what negative air means. We actually have a lower air pressure inside that room than we have outside in the rest of the house. You do that with plastic sheeting so that, the goal is to, if we're doing this room, we want to make sure that the asbestos fibers and the asbestos actually stays in this room. Plastic sheeting, you want to create a giant garbage bag out of the room. So maybe we're getting the ceiling, so that part's going to be exposed, but the walls and the floor all the way around, we're going to use that plastic sheeting to contain all that stuff. As we do so, you want to use a weed sprayer, nothing, not a hose, not any sort of a pressure washer, because again, that would cause dispersion, and we don't want that. You want to use a weed sprayer to just get that stuff wet. At that point, it becomes the consistency roughly of sheetrock mud, and then you can just get that down with a trowel. If it's done right, that material all goes on the floor of the tarp, and that can be rolled up and sealed. If you're a homeowner, it can go in the garbage can. If it's a business, that is hazardous waste and needs to be disposed of as a hazardous waste. Okay, so abatement basically means about 7 different things. You want to look for the negative air. You want to make sure the workers have themselves protected with PPE, protective equipment. You want to make sure they're using a HEPA vacuum. If they're just using a regular vacuum, all those particles are being, assuming that they actually have negative air, all those particles are being sucked out of the room through a filter that's not going to capture the particles, and now those particles are being blown through the rest of the house rather than filtered out. Obviously, if you've got all of this, let's say 100 pounds of popcorn ceiling texture that was on your ceiling and now it's in the garbage can, you want to make sure that garbage can gets left alone as well. You don't want to be forcing other garbage into there. That's just a way of releasing a whole bunch more fibers. You also want to make sure that all of that garbage, the popcorn ceiling texture, gets removed while it remains wet. If it gets brought down and it is allowed to dry out, and then you're starting to roll up the tarp, again, now you're releasing millions of fibers into the air, and this is not good. So you want to make sure that it is removed from the house while the stuff remains wet. Finally, disposal, get that right. Even though the homeowner is allowed to just throw it away, you want to make sure that that stuff is still respected. We'll be right back.